Korean War. The Forgotten War, 1950–1953. Introduction. Korean War. Soldiers marching, tanks rolling, aerial dogfights, and war-torn cities. The Korean War was one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, yet it is often overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War. It was a war that shaped the Cold War era, divided a nation, and left millions dead or displaced. But what led to this devastating conflict? Who were the key players? And how did it shape the modern world? Today, we dive deep into the Korean War, from its origins to its bloody battles, and finally, its unresolved ending. The Road to War. Historical maps showing Korea's division, images of key political figures, Stalin, Truman, Mao, Kim Il-sung, and Syngman Rhee. To understand the Korean War, we must go back to the end of World War II. Korea, which had been under Japanese rule since 1910, was liberated in 1945. However, instead of gaining full independence, Korea became a victim of Cold War politics. Division of Korea. 1945. The US and the Soviet Union agreed to divide Korea along the 38th parallel, the north controlled by the USSR, the south by the US. Rival governments. 1948. North Korea, led by Kim Il-sung, adopted communism with Soviet and Chinese backing, while South Korea, under Syngman Rhee, aligned with the West. Escalation. 1949–1950. Kim Il-sung sought Stalin's and Mao's approval to reunify Korea by force. Stalin hesitated at first but later approved after the US pulled most of its troops from Korea. The war begins. North Korea invades. June 25, 1950. Footage of North Korean tanks rolling into South Korea, South Korean forces retreating, refugees fleeing. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces, heavily armed with Soviet tanks and artillery, launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The poorly equipped South Korean army was quickly overwhelmed, and within days, the capital, Seoul, fell. North Korea's attack. 75,000 North Korean troops launched a full-scale invasion. South Korea's collapse. The South Korean army and police were unprepared, leading to rapid losses. US and UN intervention. President Harry Truman, fearing communist expansion, pushed for UN intervention. The UN Security Council, absent the Soviet Union, authorized military aid. The UN counteroffensive. Battle of Incheon. General Douglas MacArthur planning the amphibious landing at Incheon. The tide of war changed dramatically in September 1950 when General Douglas MacArthur launched a daring amphibious assault at Incheon, cutting off North Korean supply lines. The Pusan Perimeter. August 1950, South Korean and UN forces held a last defensive line in the southeast. Battle of Incheon. September 1950, a surprise attack led to the liberation of Seoul. UN push to the north. By October 1950, UN forces advanced past the 38th parallel, capturing Pyongyang. China enters the war. The Chosin Reservoir battle. Chinese troops crossing the Yalu River. Brutal winter. Just when it seemed the war was nearing an end, China entered the conflict with over 300,000 troops, catching UN forces off guard. Chinese intervention. November 1950. China, fearing an American invasion, launched massive attacks. Battle of Chosin Reservoir. US. Marines were encircled but fought their way out in freezing conditions. Retreat from North Korea. UN forces retreated south, and Seoul was recaptured by communists in January 1951. Stalemate and peace talks. 1951–1953. Trench warfare, aerial dogfights, diplomatic meetings in Panmunjom. By mid-1951, the war settled into a brutal stalemate, resembling World War I trench warfare. Seoul retaken. March 1951, UN forces recaptured Seoul after heavy fighting. Air war. US bombers devastated North Korea's infrastructure. Peace talks. 1951–1953, negotiations dragged on, with both sides reluctant to compromise. Death of Stalin. 1953, opened the door for a ceasefire agreement. Ceasefire and aftermath. July 27, 1953. Signing of the Korean Armistice Agreement, Korean DMZ today. On July 27, 1953, after 3 years of bloodshed, an armistice was signed. However, no peace treaty was ever agreed upon, leaving Korea technically still at war. The Demilitarized Zone (DMZ), a heavily fortified border remains between North and South Korea. South Korea. Approximately 1 million dead or wounded, military plus civilians. North Korea. Approximately 1.5 million dead or wounded. China. Approximately 900,000 dead or wounded. United States. 36,000 dead, 100,000 wounded. Other UN forces. Approximately 16,000 dead. Political impact. Strengthened the U.S.-South Korea alliance, deepened Cold War tensions. Who won the war? Present-day North and South Korea, modern Seoul vs. Pyongyang's military parades. The Korean War had no clear winner. While South Korea remained free, the North continued under communist rule. However, the war shaped modern geopolitics and left a lasting scar on the Korean peninsula. North Korea claims victory but suffered economic devastation. South Korea rebuilt and became an economic powerhouse. US and UN prevented communism from spreading but at great cost. China secured North Korea as a buffer zone but at heavy human cost. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, yet its consequences are still felt today. With tensions between North and South Korea remaining high, the war's legacy continues. Will there ever be peace on the Korean peninsula? Only time will tell.